Hello, fellow Gunchers. My name is Albert Padilla, and I am the host of the Basement Podcast, and also a member of this Facebook group. And I know today is chapter 6, and so I'm going to read chapter 6 for you today from the Ready Player One novel. But more on that in just one second. Before I get started, I do want to say that I want to plug the show real quick. We were going to record a live show tonight at 9 p.m. on YouTube, Facebook, and all that. We're actually going to be covering chapters 27 through 29 in a show that we're calling "We Are the Priests of the Temple of Syrinx." And so we're going to anchor the show on a lot of Rush discussion. So if you want to talk about Rush and see Rush, join us tonight. I'll put a link later again for that in the podcast in the comment section below. And then the other thing before I get started, just very quickly, if you've listened to the show, watched the show, you probably know by now, we are going to have Ernie Klein live on the show December 2nd at 9 p.m. So he's agreed to come on the show. This is just 7-8 days after the book Ready Player 2 comes out. So we'll have our chance to really get into the nitty gritty with him, if you will, about Ready Player 2 and anything else we want to discuss. So join us for a live discussion with Ernie Klein on December 2nd at 9 p.m. on the show. So again, I'll put all the links in the comment section here below so that you guys can click all that and join and subscribe. We do appreciate your support. So as far as chapter 6, this is like one of my favorite chapters. There's just so many references in here. And if you listen to the show, it's we talk about Ready Player One. Certainly we break down the chapters, but the majority of the show is spent talking about the origins of the pop culture references and just how many there are. And some of the trivia stuff that goes along with them. So when I read chapter 6 originally, I was completely blown away, and to the point where this is the chapter that actually inspired me to think about doing something with Ready Player One, although at the time wasn't sure what I was going to do, which eventually led to the podcast and the live stream. So again, it's one of my favorites. Hopefully it's one of your favorites, and hopefully you enjoy this reading. So without further ado, Ready Player One, chapter 6. The rest of my school day passed quickly until my final class, Latin. Most students took a foreign language class language that they might actually be able to use someday, like Mandarin or Hindi or Spanish. I decided to take Latin because James Halliday had taken Latin. He also occasionally used Latin words and phrases in his early adventure games. Unfortunately, even with the limitless possibilities of the Oasis at her disposal, my Latin teacher, Miss Rank, still had a hard time making her lessons interesting. And today, she was reviewing a bunch of verbs I'd already memorized, so I found my attention drifting almost immediately. While the class was in session, the simulation prevented students from accessing any data or programs that weren't authorized by their teacher, to prevent kids from watching movies, playing games, or chatting with each other instead of paying attention to the lesson. Luckily, during my junior year, I discovered a bug in the school's online software library, and by exploiting it, I could access any book in the school's online library, including Anorak's Almanac. So, whenever I got bored, like right now, I would pull it up in my window on my display and read over my favorite passages to pass the time. Over the past 5 years, the Almanac had become my Bible. Like most books nowadays, it was only available in electronic format. But I wanted to be able to read the Almanac night or day, even during one of the stack's frequent power outages. So, I fixed up an old discarded laser printer, and used it to print a hard copy. I put it in an old 3-ring binder that I kept in my backpack, and I studied it until I knew every word by heart. The Almanac contained thousands of references to Halliday's favorite books, TV shows, movies, songs, graphic novels, and video games. Most of these items were over 40 years old, so free digital copies of them could be downloaded from the Oasis. If there was something I needed that wasn't legally available for free, I could almost get it by using GunTorrent, a file sharing program used by Gunters around the world. When it came to my research, I never took any shortcuts. Over the past 5 years, I worked my way down the entire recommended Gunter reading list. Douglas Adams, Kurt Vonnegut, Neil Stephenson, Richard K. Morgan, Stephen King, Orson Scott Card, Terry Pratchett, Terry Brooks, Bester, Bradbury, Haldeman, Heinlein, Tolkien, Vance, Gibson, Gaiman, Sterling, Moorcock, Scalzi, Zalansky. I read every novel by every single one of Halliday's favorite authors. And I didn't stop there. I also watched every single film he referenced in the Almanac. If it was one of Halliday's favorites, like War Games, Ghostbusters, Real Genius, Better Off Dead, or Revenge of the Nerds, I rewatched it until I knew every scene by heart. I devoured each of what Halliday referred to as the Holy Trilogies: Star Wars, original and prequels in that order, Lord of the Rings, The Matrix, Mad Max, Back to the Future, and Indiana Jones. Halliday once said that he preferred to pretend the other Indiana Jones films after Kingdom of the Crystal Skull onward didn't exist. I tended to agree. I also absorbed the complete filmographies of each of his favorite directors: Cameron, Gilliam, Jackson, Fincher, Kubrick, Lucas, Spielberg, Del Toro, Tarantino, and, of course, Kevin Smith. I spent 3 months studying every John Hughes teen movie and memorizing all the key lines of dialogue. Only the meek get pinched, the bold survive. You could say I covered all the bases. I studied Monty Python, and not just Holy Grail either. Every single one of their films, albums, and books, and every episode of the original BBC series, including those 2 lost episodes they did for German television. I wasn't going to cut any corners. I wasn't going to miss something obvious. Somewhere along the way, I started to go overboard. I may, in fact, have started to go a little insane. I watched every episode of The Greatest American Hero, Airwolf, The A-Team, Knight Rider, Misfits of Science, and The Muppet Show. What about The Simpsons, you ask? I knew more about Springfield than I knew about my own city. Star Trek, oh, I did my homework. TOS, TNG, DS9, even Voyager and Enterprise. I watched them all in chronological order. The movies, too. Phasers, Locked on Stun. I gave myself a crash course in 80s Saturday morning cartoons. I learned the name of every last goddamn GoBot and Transformer. Land of the Lost, Thundar the Barbarian, He-Man, Schoolhouse Rock, G.I. Joe. I knew them all, because knowing is half the battle. Who was my friend when things got rough? HR Pufnstuf. Japan. Did I cover Japan? Yes. Yes, indeed. Anime and live action. Godzilla, Gamera, Star Blazers, the Space Giants, and G-Force. Go, Speed Racer, go! I wasn't some dilettante. I wasn't screwing around. I memorized every last Bill Hicks stand-up routine. Music? Well, covering all the music wasn't easy. It took some time. The 80s was a long decade. 10 years. 10 years. 10 whole years. And Halliday didn't seem to have any very discerning tastes. He listened to everything. So I did too. Pop, rock, new wave, punk, heavy metal. From the Police to Journey to R.E.M. to The Clash, I tackled it all. I burned through the entire They Might Be Giants discography in 2 weeks. Devo took a little longer. I watched a lot of YouTube videos of cute girls playing 80s cover tunes on ukuleles. Technically, this wasn't part of my research, but I had a serious, cute, geeky girls playing ukuleles fetish that I could neither explain nor defend. I memorized lyrics, silly lyrics by bands with names like Van Halen, Bon Jovi, Def Leppard, and Pink Floyd. I kept at it. I burned the Midnight Oil. Did you know that Midnight Oil was an Australian band with a 1987 hit called Beds Are Burning? I was obsessed. I wouldn't quit. My grades suffered. I didn't care. I read every issue of every comic book title Halliday had ever collected. I wasn't going to have anyone questioning my commitment, especially when it came to video games. Video games were my area of expertise, my double weapon specialization, my dream Jeopardy category. I downloaded every game mentioned or referenced in the almanac from Aklabeth to Zaxxon. I played each title until I'd mastered it, and then I moved on to the next one. You'd be amazed about how much research you can get done when you have no life whatsoever. 12 hours a day, 7 days a week is a lot of study time. I worked my way through every video game genre and platform. Classic arcade coin-ops, home computer, console, and handheld. Text-based adventures, first-person shooters, third-person RPGs, ancient 8, 16, and 32-bit classics written in the previous century. The harder a game was to beat, the more I enjoyed it. And I played these ancient digital relics night after night, year after year, and I discovered that I had a talent for them. I could master most action titles in a few hours, and there wasn't any adventure or role-playing game I couldn't solve. I never needed any walkthroughs or cheat codes. Everything just clicked, and I was even better at old arcade games. When I was in the zone on a high-speed classic like Defender, I felt like a hawk in flight, or the way I thought a shark might feel as it cruises the ocean floor. For the first time, I knew what it was to be a natural at something, to have a gift. But it wasn't my research into old movies, comics, or video games that yielded my first real clue. That came while I was studying the history of old pen and paper role playing games. Reprinted on the first page of Anorak's Almanac were the 4 rhyming lines of verse Halliday had recited in the invitation video. 3 hidden keys open 3 secret gates, wherein the errant will be tested for worthy traits, and those with the skill to survive these straits will reach the end where the prize awaits. At first, this seemed to be the only direct reference to the contest in the entire almanac. But then, buried among all those rambling journal entries and essays on pop culture, I discovered a hidden message. Scattered throughout the text of the almanac were a series of marked letters. Each of these letters had a tiny, nearly invisible notch cut into its outline. I'd first noticed these notches the year after Halliday died. I was reading my hard copy of the almanac at the time, and so at first I thought these notches were nothing but tiny imperfections, perhaps due to the paper or the ancient printer I had used to print out the almanac. But when I checked the electronic version of the book available on Halliday's website, I found the same notches on the exact same letters. And if you zoomed in on one of these letters, the notches stood out as plain as day. Halliday had put them there. He marked these letters for a reason. There turned out to be 112 of these notched letters scattered throughout the book. By writing them down in the order in which they appeared, I discovered that they spelled something. I nearly died of excitement as I wrote it down in my Grail diary. The copper key awaits explorers in a tomb filled with horrors, but you have much to learn if you hope to earn a place among the high scorers. Other Gunters had discovered this hidden message, of course, but they were all wise enough to keep it to themselves. For a while, anyways. About 6 months after I discovered the hidden message, this loudmouth MIT freshman his name was Stephen Pendergast, and he decided to get his 15 minutes of fame by sharing his discovery with the media. The news feeds broadcast an interview with this moron for a month, even though he didn't have the first clue about the message's meaning. After that, going public with the clue became known as pulling a Pendergast. Once the message became public knowledge, Gunters nicknamed it the Limerick. The entire world had known about it for almost 4 years now, but no one seemed to understand its true meaning, and the copper key still had yet to be found. I knew Halliday had frequently used similar riddles in many of his early adventure games, and each of those riddles had made sense in the context of the game. So I devoted an entire session of my Grail diary to deciphering the limerick line by line. The copper key awaits explorers. This line seemed pretty straightforward, no hidden message that I could detect. In a tomb filled with horrors. This line was trickier. Taken at face value, it seemed to say that the key was hidden in a tomb somewhere, one filled with horrifying stuff. But then, during the course of my research, I discovered an old Dungeons & Dragons supplement called Tomb of Horrors, which had been published in 1978. From the moment I saw the title, I was certain the second line of the limerick was in reference to it. Halliday and Morrow had played advanced Dungeons & Dragons all through high school, along with several other pen and paper role-playing games like GURPS, Champions, Car Wars, and Rollmaster. Tomb of Horrors was a thin booklet called a module. It contained detailed maps and room-by-room descriptions of an underground labyrinth infested with undead monsters. D&D players could explore the labyrinth with their characters as the Dungeon Master read from the module and guided them through the story it contained, describing everything they saw and encountered along the way. As I learned more about how these early role-playing games worked, I realized that a D&D module was the primitive equivalent of a quest in the Oasis. And D&D characters were just like avatars. In a way, these old role-playing games had been the first virtual reality simulations created long before computers were powerful enough to do the job. In those days, if you wanted to escape to another world, you had to create it yourself using your brain, some paper, pencils, dice, and a few rule books. This realization kind of blew my mind. It changed my whole perspective on the hunt for Halliday's Easter egg. From then on, I began to think the hunt was an elaborate D&D module, and Halliday was obviously the Dungeon Master, even if he was now controlling the game from beyond the grave. I found a digital copy of the 67-year-old Tomb of Horrors module buried deep in an ancient FTP archive. As I studied it, I began to develop a theory. Somewhere in the Oasis, Halliday had recreated the Tomb of Horrors, and he'd hidden the copper key inside it. I spent the next few months studying the module and memorizing all of its maps and room descriptions in anticipation of the day that I would finally figure out where it was located. But that was the rub. The limerick didn't appear to give any hint as to where Halliday had hidden the damn thing. The only clue seemed to be, you have much to learn if you hope to earn a place among the high scorers. I recited those words over and over in my head until I wanted to howl in frustration. Much to learn. Yeah, okay, fine. I have much to learn about what? There were literally thousands of worlds in the Oasis, and Halliday could have hidden his recreation of the Tomb of Horrors on any one of them. Searching every planet one by one would take forever, even if I had the means to do so. A planet named Gygax in Sector 2 seemed like the obvious place to start looking. Halliday had coded the planet himself, and he named it after Gary Gygax, one of the creators of Dungeons & Dragons and the author of the original Tomb of Horrors module. According to Gunterpedia, a Gunter wiki, the planet Gygax was covered with recreations of old D&D modules, but Tomb of Horrors was not one of them. There didn't appear to be a recreation of the Tomb of Horrors on any of the other D&D themed worlds in the Oasis either. Gunters had turned all of those planets upside down and scoured every inch of their surfaces. Had a recreation of the Tomb of Horrors had been hidden on one of them, it would have been found and logged long ago. So, the tomb had to be hidden somewhere else, and I didn't have the first clue where. But I told myself that if I just kept at it and continued doing research, I'd eventually learn what I needed to figure out the tomb's hiding place. In fact, that was probably what Halliday meant. You have much to learn if you hope to earn a place among the high scorers. If any other Gunters out there shared my interpretation of the limerick, so far they'd been smart enough to keep quiet about it. I'd never seen any posts about the Tomb of Horrors on any Gunter message boards. I realize, of course, that this might be because my theory about old D&D module was completely lame and totally off base. So I'd continue to watch and read and listen and study, preparing for the day when I finally stumbled across the clue that would lead me to the copper key. And then it finally happened, right while I was sitting there daydreaming in Latin class. So hopefully you enjoyed that. That was chapter 6 of the Ready Player One novel. I will get this over to, I'll put a link out again into the Gunter Facebook group. So again, apologies for not posting it live there. I ran into some technical issues and just wasn't working out. And I really needed to get this out today, right around lunchtime. So again, thank you guys for watching, viewing, listening. And if you want to join us, we're going to be live tonight again on The Basement, both on YouTube, and then we'll release the audio podcast later. And then finally, one last reminder, Ernie Klein is going to be on the show live with us on December 2nd at 9 p.m. So please tune into that. It's going to be a great time. So thanks again, everybody. May the force be with you always.